Modern agriculture has given us the safest, the most affordable, and the most plentiful food supply in the history of our species.
But with our global population growing at current rates, some have estimated that we'll have to produce more food in the next 30 years than we have in the entire history of humanity. The biggest threats to face our species are things like climate change, biodiversity loss, and soil loss.
But there is one group of people who can save us from that future: farmers.
So I'm on a journey into the future of our food.
Oh, miracle! Amazing!
To witness for myself what the best and brightest minds are doing.
Everybody wants a fix. Well, the fix is nature itself.
To avert this imminent food security crisis.
We need to start to think now in order to solve the problem that we'll have in the future.
I'll question received wisdom.
Why not just get rid of the cows?
And interrogate how our food supply chains can respond to unparalleled events like the COVID-19 pandemic.
Technology is going to have an extraordinarily large part to play in the food chain, and I'm really excited about it.
Wow, look at this. So here's what I want to know. If we could radically rethink how we treat our land, what we grow, and how we produce it, if we could not just change our food system, but our whole planet for the better.
Last time, I started my journey by exploring what our frontline farmers are doing to help reduce the impact that farming has on the planet. Now I'm taking it one step further to understand if the crops we choose to grow are the right ones to meet the needs of our future food security.
Look at this. Almost more plants than my flat.
I'm at the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, where I trained as a botanist. Here they hold examples of tens of thousands of different plant species.
I challenge anyone to not be bowled over.
But this abundant variety highlights a worrying disparity in how we use plants to feed ourselves.
Astonishingly, more than half the calories that all of human civilization is based upon come from the seeds of just 3 grass species: wheat, rice, and corn. And that's a perilous foundation for all of humanity.
The fact that we rely on such a small range of crops to feed us means that if there was an environmental change or a disease that caused one of them to fail, we'd be in real trouble. And if you think that's unlikely, think again. It's happening right now to one of our most popular fruit.
Here we are, some towering banana plants. They're the 4th most important crop in the world, next to rice, wheat, and corn. And in the West, we kind of think of them as a kind of a dessert fruit, the kind of thing that you might pack in a lunchbox. But in places like Africa, they are an absolute staple crop, eaten as a starch source, green bananas or plantains eaten as a vegetable. And the whole economies of certain Latin American countries are linchpinned upon their production. They are not just a snack.
Almost half of all bananas grown on the planet are a single variety called the Cavendish, and it's at imminent risk of extinction. Kenya grows around 1.5 million tons of bananas annually, and the crop is a key local food source.
Ambapo kwa siku moja, kama siku sio mbaya, naweza uza ndizi moja mzima.
Ukulima wa ndizi tunafanya kwa sababu inafanya vizuri hapa kwetu na inatusaidia tuendelee kukaa kwa ulimwengu huu, tupate kukula ili tukae.
But a deadly fungus is sweeping the world, and Kenyan farmers are now finding themselves on the front line of the fight to find a solution.
The Cavendish variety, they are susceptible to a disease called Panama disease. This disease clears all the leaves and then it clears the entire plant. So Cavendish is very susceptible.
Panama disease has been working its way around the world with devastating effect, and it's now been detected in Africa. But at Calro Kakamega Research Institute, they've been studying alternative banana varieties that they hope can be as popular as the Cavendish, but much more resilient to disease.
The Cavendish is dying because it's prone to most of the pests and diseases. But we have the S02E02 that's coming up very well to replace, is fairly tolerant to some of the pests and diseases that we have around.
The FIA breeds were originally developed in Honduras, and now they're being trialed in over 50 countries worldwide.
It's also drought tolerant compared to the Cavendish. So in areas where we get little rain, you'll still have harvest.
With the help of Kenyan NGO Sendacow, farmer George Matete has been trying the FIA-17 variety, amongst others, on his homestead.
This is the FIA-17 that is ready for harvesting, and we are harvesting it. We give it a knock so that it comes down. The FIA-17 is actually the banana of the future. Most diseases do not affect it. They do, but not as they affect other types.
Okay. We want to have farmers who are food secure. Banana can give our farmers a very good food security.
You have to give me 300. It is quite a promising type of banana. I'm hopeful, quite hopeful. God allowing, I'm hopeful.
The banana crisis is a perfect example of the risk of relying on a narrow species base for our food. And with the population growth predicted in the next 30 years, that risk intensifies.
So there's an urgent need to diversify, to broaden that base out, to create a more sustainable and stable future, particularly with 10 billion people to feed.
I think we're there. Carrie, can you see me?
I can. Hi, James.
It's a philosophy embraced by Carrie Fowler, senior advisor to the Crop Trust, and a man instrumental in founding the Svalbard Seed Vault near the North Pole, where they've collected seeds of around 1 million different crop varieties as a safeguard against extinction.
Frankly, as Darwin noted in the first chapter of Origin of Species, that we have diversity in the world, and diversity is a key component of evolution. And we might think that this doesn't apply to our agricultural crops, to our food system, but we need crops that are adapted to new conditions. They have to evolve or they die. And so how are they going to evolve? What traits are they going to need, and what traits will they have in the future? You know, since our agricultural crops are domesticated crops, their evolution is in our hands. We really manage their evolution, and that's why we need these collections of crop diversity.
But humans have been breeding crops for arguably 20,000 years or more. We've been getting better and better, and the crops that we have today are far superior than some of the very earliest ones. You know, things are much larger, they're more calorific, in many cases they're more nutrient dense. What's the point in saving old crops? Why do they matter? Surely we've got all the good ones now.
Well, the new crops come from the old crops. You don't just sit around as a plant breeder and imagine what you want in a new version of a particular maize or wheat plant and then snap your fingers and it happens. What you have to do is you have to go back into the seed banks, the gene banks, and you have to, in a way, troll through those and try to figure out, well, does this old variety of wheat or maize or whatever have that particular trait that I want to breed into the new variety? You know, Aldo Leopold, a great American conservationist, said that the first rule of successful tinkering is to save all the pieces. And I like to think that even after so many thousands of years of agricultural history, we're still a little bit still tinkering.
As a botanist, I find it incredible that there's an estimated 50,000 edible plants on the planet, and we basically rely on just 3 grass species. What about all the other ones? And could looking at them provide us solutions for the future?
One British farmer thinks just that. And he's been making a success of an unlikely ancient crop that could have the potential to add vital diversity to our global food system.
Well, I'm jealous. I'd like to drive one of those to work every day.
That is good fun.
Can I go see your fields?
Yes, sure. Come on this way.
Amazing, amazing.
Wanting to diversify from wheat and corn on his family's farm, 6th-generation farmer Stephen Jones has turned to the past in search of a potential super crop of the future.
Now, this isn't something you expect to see in the English countryside. Quinoa. A lot of quinoa as well.
Yeah, this is a whole field of it.
Known to the Incas as the mother of all grains, quinoa was first domesticated over 5,000 years ago. But compared to our common global crops, it's largely been left behind.
It's so weird to see it and not see giant Peruvian mountains in the background, rolling British countryside. Look at the color as well.
So could quinoa become a staple crop like corn and potatoes, both of which originated in broadly the same part of the world, but went on to feed the entire planet?
So, Stephen, tell me, what is quinoa?
So quinoa is a grain crop that we can now grow in the UK, and it's used very much like rice and couscous. It's high in protein, high in fibre, high in minerals, so it's really good for you.
Kind of like a rice alternative, but you can get away with it in our climate.
Exactly.
So how do you take something that's from the other side of the world, from the Andes, the tropical Andes, and get it to grow on a blustery North Atlantic island?
The key thing for us that we found is genetics. You've got to have exactly the right quinoa varieties. And what that allows us to do is to essentially have a variety that will mature in our climate, produce a good quality seed in our climate, and that allows us to have a really great product for eating.
Stephen is now the largest producer of quinoa in the UK, and the grain has become a familiar sight on supermarket shelves in products like salads and stews.
So what I love is when you rub it between your thumb and forefingers, you can instantly see the grains popping out. Look at that hipster food right there. Why is it that people have that weird cultural association between quinoa and something being posh, something being a high-status food?
I think, from what people have told me, it's just down to the name. Quinoa just sounds a bit hipster, doesn't it?
You're a 6th-generation farmer, and yet you're really shaking things up. Why do you think diversity on farms is important?
I think nowadays it's all about trying to mitigate risk. So we know that we could have really bad weather for certain crops. So to try to grow crops that are all out of sync with each other is a really important thing to do.
But the trouble is, even though quinoa is considered really nutritious and is growing in popularity, it hasn't benefited from thousands of years of intense global farming like the big 3, wheat, rice, and corn.
What do you think the next 20 years has in store? Is it going to take over or even rival one of these? Are we going to have a big 4 rather than a big 3?
Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be as big as that. I think crops like wheat and barley have got such a huge advantage on us in terms of the breeding work and the agronomy. Quinoa has a long way to catch up. I don't think it's going to rival any of those just yet.
And therein lies a problem. While we wait, we still need our big 3 to keep delivering.
While boosting the diversity of our diets, as Stephen's doing with quinoa, is absolutely essential to the future of food security, it is only one tool in the toolbox, and it's a slow one. It takes time, and that's a luxury we don't have.
With the global population rising so fast, we need crops that we can rely on now. Those big 3 have served us well, so as well as broadening our options, we also need to make sure we can protect those workhorses. At the John Innes Centre in the UK, a group of scientists are researching pioneering genetic techniques that could help protect us from the potentially catastrophic consequences of a failure in one of the bedrocks of our food supply, wheat.
Hey, you must be Kat.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
I can't wait to find out all about this mildew.
Oh, well, wait to be impressed. We've got some really horrible-looking mildew for you to see today.
Mildew is just one of the disastrous wheat diseases that they're studying.
The damp, cool conditions, which are quite typical of UK winter, actually really means that the infection is quite prominent.
This isn't Chelsea flower shade.
This is an example of powdery mildew infection on the leaves of this wheat plant. So what's interesting about this fungus is it actually keeps the host plant alive, but saps it of its nutrients. Then what happens at the later developmental stages is it sporulates and makes these spores, which will later go on to land in the soil and survive over winter, and then can go on to infect the following year's crop. Yield loss can be as much as 40%. And it's one of the most commonly produced food crops, and actually it's thought that 1/4 of the world calories and 20% of the world protein comes from wheat.
To combat these infections, the team here are experimenting using a type of protein called CRISPR as part of gene editing technology. It's a technique that's not without its critics. Its use is even prohibited in some countries. Professor Wendy Harwood is the lead scientist here.
What's the difference between gene editing and genetic modification? They sound, on the surface, very, very similar.
The main difference is that with genetic modification, you are inserting a new piece of DNA of some sort into the plant, and that new piece of DNA could end up anywhere. We can't control where it goes, but with gene editing, we can control that the change that we want can be in a very precise place. Basically, how editing works, it's like a pair of scissors for DNA. Like wheat plants have a huge amount of DNA. I mean, if you were to write out the DNA of a wheat plant, you could write it in 1,000 books of 1,000 pages. Gene editing allows you to take those molecular scissors, go to one of those books, one of those pages, one precise place on the page, and cut the DNA at that point. And then there's a lot of things that can happen at that cut point to introduce a particular change that you might want in your wheat plant.
You talk about it being precise using a scissors, but these aren't actual scissors.
They're molecular scissors. So what we mean is, basically what we mean by those scissors, it's an enzyme. So it's a nuclease. It's a chemical that is capable of making a break in the DNA.
And Wendy's actually allowing me to have a go at delivering those chemical scissors into a microscopic plant cell.
So you need your pipette.
Yep.
And what you're going to do is to put just a very tiny drop of that bacterial culture onto each of those tiny embryos in that dish. How's that working?
Oh, it's coming out. I'm petrified. Oh, wow, that wasn't a tiny drop.
That's a big drop. You drowned that one, but never mind.
Oh, gosh, another one. Yeah, definitely a bit of a bacteria swimming pool in that. Sorry, Wendy.
In the greenhouses are wheat varieties galore, any one of which might have a magically useful bit of DNA that could be added to our tried and tested crops.
Wow, look at this. And when we talk about genetic diversity of wheat, you know, if you're looking at a bag of flour, you don't see anything. But when you're looking at the fully grown plants with the seed heads on them, these are so different.
Yeah, I mean, just looking along here, we've got a lot of diversity. That's a pasta wheat, so those would be used for pasta. Next to them is a bread wheat, so these are quite different. You can see
different heights, different colour, different form.
And just within this little patch here, huge amount of variation. If you just look at the ears, you know, this one is short and stubby, this one is taller.
So it's often about introducing mutations that already naturally exist into the places that you want them.
A great deal of it is about that. So it's about using these sort of populations of wheat to discover the variation that is valuable. So it might be something that just gives it a nutritional benefit, for example, or it might give a resistance to a disease.
So if you find a really old heritage variety of tomato that tastes incredible and take a modern variety with great yield and just say, let's just tweak that, let's just increase the flavour to match an old variety.
But if you imagine, if we did that the old-fashioned way and we just crossed them together, again with wheat, an old, very old wheat and a modern wheat, the breeders would have years of work to do to get back to something which was like the modern wheat.
It's like a genetic lottery. You don't know that they're actually going to be arranged in the right way.
So there's a huge amount of work. Whereas if we know exactly the change we want and we can go in to the variety we want and make that change directly, then we're years ahead already.
You know, in the current situation where the world is moving really fast with things like climate change, you don't have 20 years to wait for a solution to a current problem.
I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We could have a pandemic of plant disease as well. We might need to respond to it really quickly. So tools like this, you know, could be really valuable in helping us to get the resistant plants out in the field to provide the food that we need as quickly as possible.
In an increasingly unpredictable world, we can't simply look at tried and tested solutions to meet novel problems, because particularly when it comes to food, we can't even predict with any precision what those problems are going to be. We often talk about food as if you have to pick a side, as if you have to either go into history and find old-timey solutions to things, or sweep all of that aside for innovative, cutting-edge ideas. But the reality is you don't. It's all about embracing all potential options. And at the key of all of this sits farmers.
But in the future, who will those farmers be? Next time, I'll be looking into how we grow new farmers.
Look at that.
Exciting, isn't it? We need to feed people in a changing climate. We need to feed people in a growing population. We need the best minds to do that.
The people who'll hold the future of our food in their hands.
Who are this next generation of farmers, in your opinion?